Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of SafeDefend Live. I'm Phil Nichols. I'm going to be the guy trying to host this thing, joined today by Dr. Greg Vecchi. Dr. V, how's my friend?
I'm doing fine, Phil. It's been a long time since you and I did a SafeDefend Live.
It has. You've been traveling all over the world and doing trainings, and I know you're with a great group of law enforcement professionals last week. You're in Vegas this week at a conference. I don't know, when did you get back? When did you get back to the Kansas City area?
Late last night, about
Okay.
30 or so, and then we've got training scheduled for another SafeDefend client next week, and then the week after.
Yeah.
And it's just nonstop, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's better than the alternatives, what I always tell people. So, yeah, it's all good. Well, hey, I want to, there's been a lot of talk about a lot of different things. There's a lot of movement going on all over the country right now in our subject matter. I want to talk about the assessment. I know you've got some real good thoughts on how to do assessments. What's the value in assessments? How do you use an assessment once it's done to create real world solutions for your business, your school, wherever you're gathering to do work or perform the activities you do. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. V. Talk to me about assessments.
Oh, well, thanks, Phil. I went to this safety conference. It was the National School Safety Conference. That was where I just got back from Las Vegas, and it was quite a nice mix of security professionals, safety professionals. There were police there, crisis, emergency management people, safety program directors, school administrators, things like this. And as I was sitting in the vendor area, we had a booth set up. And I'm just looking around at all the vendors. And what kind of struck me was how many of these vendors are all focused on dealing with an outside threat coming in, whether it's through mapping or cameras or some sort of a notification system, wireless clicker, the pray and press people that think it's going to work if they just hit a clicker and all this other stuff. And what was kind of interesting to me is what I think is missing that people don't realize, and I brought this up in a presentation I did there, was a real understanding of risk assessment and how you can use a valid and good risk assessment really to drive your resources, because it takes money to buy all the safety stuff, and there's so many choices out there. And it's kind of, what do you buy on a limited budget, right? And I think that's a big problem for superintendents and CEOs of companies and things like this, is find out, okay, look, there's a lot of threats out there. What is the biggest bang for my buck, right? And so I thought about that, and that's what I wanted to kind of talk about today. Is there a way you can pop up that slide?
Yeah, let me. I'm an IT expert. Let me see if I can do this real quick. There we go.
All right. So this is the way that I like to conceptualize the whole targeted violence problem. Now, we've talked a lot about left and right of bang on this show. And again, just for the people, just as a reminder, anything left of the attack, and that's the red area in the middle. Anything left is preventive, it's proactive, it's things you can do to be proactive. And of course, that's the space we want to try to be in, because if we can prevent the violence or at least mitigate it, that's always better than the alternative. And of course, right of bang is when it's too late, the attack is underway. And just to cover this slide real quick, because I want to move into the importance of the risk assessment for this entire slide and what's in it, is so on the left-hand side, and the proactive or preventive side, we look at planning, we look at training, and we look at drills. And we break that down for essentially 4 major components. One is threat assessment, which is you're trying to determine who your threat is, and then take measures to intervene, right? And then risk assessment, which is probabilities of violence or something bad happening to your organization. Vulnerability is your gaps in your protection, and the mitigation measures are things like locks and metal detectors and all the other stuff you do to try to mitigate it.
Right.
And then on the right of bang side, it's basically response preparation, and that's again planning, training, and drills. And it's broken down into 2 things. One is your internal response protocols. One is the notification and protection piece, right? So the SafeDefend system is an example, an excellent example of notification, immediate notification to 911 and messages to everyone, so that everyone knows what's happening. And then your evade, escape and evade and engage, stop the bleed training. That's your protection piece. And then, of course, when it's all over, with your after action reviews, reunifications, things like this. And then how do we, make the process better, kind of a lessons learned. And then finally, you have the external response protocols. And that's your outside of your organization, outside of your school, outside of your work. That's going to be the police response, fire, EMS, and just the full community. And that's kind of the universe of targeted violence, approaches, right, to prevent it and then to deal with it. Now, one of the things that I think is important and what's missing is the viewing the risk assessment as something it's not. So, for example, what we have as far as risk is a probability that something's going to happen. And so we have to first and foremost put our resources and make our priorities to what is going to be the most likely type of violence and where is it going to happen and who's going to do it. And it's very different between schools and workplaces, okay, as far as who it is, but it's very similar as far as where it comes from. So, for example, in school violence, the offender is about 91% of the time, that's most recent stats from Secret Service and FBI, is about 91% of the chance of violence is going to come from within. It's going to be a child, it's going to be a student or former student. And so if you look at that stat right away, then you can step back and look at your risk assessment and say, okay, where do I want to put my resources? Do I want to put it in the 9% of likely attackers who are strangers, who have nothing to do with the school, or am I going to put more of my focus on the inside? It was kind of interesting because one of the vendors at that conference had this tremendous AI camera tracking capability. And so when you were looking at the students' faces in the example, they all had this box around it, and then the computer would kind of follow the box on their head everywhere they went. But above the box, it said registered student. And it automatically eliminates or disregards that student as a potential threat. And they're looking at strangers, they're looking at furtive moves, they're looking at vaping and all this other stuff. Well, you're not going to have vaping. Vaping's probably going to be in the bathroom, right? So I don't know how they're going to
right.
But, and so it was just kind of interesting because it's like, where do you put your resources? You're going to put your majority of resources in the probability, 91% probability, where it's going to come from a kid from within, or are you going to put it in the 9% probability? The other thing is understanding that, what's the risk in terms of the tool used? Well, everyone says guns, and certainly everyone who really wants to hurt somebody probably should get a gun because that's going to be your best success rate. It's kind of the equalizer. But the reality situation is in schools, unlike workplaces, about 40%, nearly 40% are knives or edged weapons. So then you have another focus. If we're focusing on the gun, you miss the knife. If you focus on the gun, you miss the kid who's going to get into a truck and run somebody over in the parking lot because again, when you look at a probability, you have to understand, the offender. And the last thing, I kind of want to touch on is that these offenders are not crazed lunatics. They're not maniacs. They're not strangers. Almost all of them are kids who are in crisis. They are
right.
kids who have, they can't take it anymore. They can't, they've lost their ability to cope. Say like with bullying, for example, it's a major problem in schools, and they don't have anywhere to turn, or they've tried to turn and couldn't get help. And then they get on that pathway to violence. Right. And
right.
so that's when you're looking at risk assessment, you're looking at, what is the probability of attack? Who is it likely to be? Okay. What type of attack is it likely to be? Where and when is it going to happen? And so if in setting up your security measures, whether it's, metal detectors or it's locks or things like this, so look at it from the standpoint of, biggest bang for your buck, because the resources are limited out there. It's very expensive to take care of security, especially for an active killer event. And I think that there's a lot of value in looking at risk assessment from a true factual ground truth basis on really what your threats are, and then generate your decisions as far as what security measures and technology to get based on that.
Well, I think what's interesting, Dr. V, and what I love about your left to bang philosophy and approach is, everything up to this point's always been on the reactive side. Everything. We put cameras in. Cameras are great for reactive. You gave the example of the AI, and there's so many potential flaws there. It's ridiculous. But we've got to get past the mindset of not wanting to address and talk about, and most importantly, then execute on strategies that are going to actually prevent these events from happening. Everything's reactive. And I think that's why there's so much momentum going on right now. And to be quite frank, while you're gone all the darn time, is because people are starting to understand that we've got to have real world training and solutions on the left of bang side.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And I guess the other thing I would add to that is, this is some of the value that we bring from SafeDefend's perspective, is that for all the decisions we make on what's considered good training, what we're going to include in the training, even what we're going to include in the technology and the future things we have planned, it's basically all based on really truly understanding the offender's motivation and their behavior and the meaning behind that behavior, because that's how they're going to act. I mean,
right.
A serial killer is not the same type of offender as an active shooter or an active killer or a cyber hacker or a cop killer. They're very different. And so if you're making assumptions on even how the offender is going to react or behave, then you're going to make big mistakes. And so really what we want to try to do is understand the offender behavior and factor that into every single thing we do proactively and every single thing we do reactively. And then the second thing I think that we kind of bring to the table here is an understanding of the body alarm response. When you are threatened, right? When there's a threat of death or serious bodily injury, people's physiology takes over, right?
Yeah.
And so you're going to have the adrenaline dump, the cortisol dump. You're going to have the fight or flight syndrome, all this stuff. And you're going to freeze unless you're trained. And so again, knowing that, that you don't have the use of fine motor skills. And so another advantage, and again, what initially got my attention for SafeDefend was the instant notification with the touch of a finger. Anyone can do this. Anyone can train to do this.
Yep.
It takes the burden off of you, so you can deal with your physiology, the fight and flight and freeze, and get control of that through training, and then survive and help your kids survive.
Yeah, and I think being real world and having those tough conversations, I think, is where it all starts. I think for years we've approached this from what we can't do because of budget restraints. Instead, we need to be looking at, and we'll go back to our previous lives in the military. It didn't really matter what you have. What you had to stay focused on was the mission, right? So if you had 100 armed combatants coming at you and you had one 20-round clip left, magazine left, you didn't think about that. You just figured out, okay, how am I going to survive this? How am I going to complete my mission with what I have? And I think that's what's happening again. It doesn't matter what you have. It matters what can we do with what you have to put you in a much better situation. And I think that's to me, that's the paradigm shift we're starting to see inside schools and private businesses, where they're acknowledging, hey, we've got to take some proactive steps to make our people safer.
Yeah, you're exactly right, because you have to deal with what hand you're dealt, right? And so you're not going to have unlimited resources. And like your analogy is alluding to, Phil, it's about knowing what your budget is, knowing what you have available, and then choosing the ones that best fit your most probable risks.
Exactly. Common sense goes a long ways in everything in life. I think this is one of those areas, where you've got to really sit down and evaluate and have tough conversations internally inside your organization. But it begins with being the understanding that there's reactive and there's proactive, and everything in life that you can do that's proactive before you get to reactive is going to produce a better outcome.
Absolutely. 100%.
Well, Dr. V, I appreciate it, brother. Our time is up today. It's always good to see you. Have safe travels next week and the week after that and the week after that and the week after that. And I know you and I will get an opportunity to get face-to-face again here down the road not too long, do some more training videos and some more stuff we're putting out there on the SafeDefend Academy. Let the folks know how they can get a hold of you if they have any questions.
Well, my direct phone number, 605-920-0229. That's my cell phone. You can also text me on that. Email is Greg, greg.vecchi, V like Victor, ECCHI, greg.vecchi @safedefend.com.
Dr. V, you are the man, my brother. I always enjoy our conversations.
You too,
have a wonderful weekend with your bride. Enjoy those grandkids, and we'll talk soon.
Certainly will. You too, brother. Take care.
All right, friend.